With the drought conditions that prevailed over much of Alberta last year, it was a challenging season for ag producers across our province. So how did farmers fare and what are things looking like for them this upcoming season? Well, joining me to discuss this is Lynn Jacobson. He farms near Enchant in southern Alberta and is also president of the Alberta Federation of Agriculture. Lynn, thanks for joining me today. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, good morning. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you. So, Lynn, tell me, how bad was last year's drought for Alberta farmers across the province? Did we see any operations hit so hard that they were forced to quit or to sell?
Mhm. Yeah, no, the conditions in Alberta last year varied depending on the region you were in. So not all the province was in as dire straits as other parts of the province. Uh, the breakdown for the province probably is in southern Alberta, where I'm located right now, was probably some of the driest parts of Alberta, and going in. And then as you went farther north, you got up towards the Red Deer, Lacombe, Edmonton, Three Hills areas. They had better conditions and growing conditions. They received more rainfall over the year, and they turned out in them areas maybe to having half a crop in some areas, or maybe 75% of the crop, depending on if they picked up rains or not. Then you moved over to the eastern part of the province, and then it turned drier again. And a lot of those people in some of those areas, maybe they only got a quarter of the crop that they were expecting. And then you get into the Peace River country, which was really dry to begin with. And then it started raining in some of those areas up there. But as I mentioned earlier, the worst part basically was the southern Alberta region. And we really did not receive any significant rainfall over the whole year.
Right. So so how bad was it for southern Alberta producers? And were there any specific areas that were hit harder in southern Alberta than others?
Yeah. Well, I could pick up one of our, and I guess our area around the Enchant area, Lomond, Milo areas, which north of Lethbridge. Basically, the dry land acreage in this area, I guess yields ran from non-existent to maybe 14 or 15 bushel an acre, depending on your cropping patterns and what you did. Like our normal cropping, I guess, average in this area on dry land is around 30 to 35 bushel an acre. It has gone up a lot better, when we get some rain. Year before that, yields were sitting around 60 to 85 bushel an acre on dry land. Now, there's also the irrigation in our area too, and our farm has a lot of irrigation on it. So we're sort of a mixed community or mixed farming area with the irrigation and the dry land. And the irrigation, well, it was hurt somewhat from the heat, and that we were still, we come up with a fairly decent crop.
Okay, so where are we at right now with current moisture levels then? So if we don't have a wet spring, for example, are we going to be in trouble?
Yes, southern Alberta especially. There's been varying amounts of snowfall over this area. The Carson area, which is deep south and more to the west, has got more snow and that snow than we have. You get up into the Lethbridge area and then over to us towards the Enchant area, and then even into the Lomond area too.
My goodness. So what effect has this drought had on beef producers, for example?
Yeah. Well, we're part of the Hay West program, which we started up, and I think a lot of your agriculture producers will be aware of that. That's through the Canadian Federation of Agriculture. We started the initiative in bringing hay into southern Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. Now, we're getting calls, and this is what we directly know from a report we had last week with the Hay West program. There's probably 40 or 50 producers in, I guess, southern Alberta, maybe even Saskatchewan, that are really in dire straits at this point in time. And those people have been telling the Hay West coordinators that if they don't get any feed supply on that, they're going to have to liquidate their herds. There will be other people that'll be a little bit better off, but if they don't have any rainfall, significant rainfall going into spring, that's still going to cause a problem because there won't be much, top growth and grass, and that as we go forward. And that again is subject to regions like around the Waterton area and that area. Last year they had pretty good rains and significant. When you got farther to the east, then it started drying out quite a bit. And a lot of farmers really did, or a lot of ranchers did not have adequate supplies to carry them through the winter. In fact, you're seeing ads now in the paper for people advertising, can you spare a couple bales, or can you spare half a load of hay, to people that maybe have had adequate reserves for their own and getting closer to spring, feel that they can maybe, sell some of that hay.
Mm-hmm. Wow, so this has really had an effect on the supply. And would it affect the cost of feed as well?
Oh yeah, the cost of feed has gone up. It's just like everything else. Hay is probably, ahead of the game on everything else because of the dry conditions and that spillover, on the effect of prices on that. So hay has been very expensive, for quite a while. And I know some people, it's hard to justify, but when you've got cattle that are ready to calve and things like this, and you need something to do, unless you're going to sell those animals, they're going to have to pay a price basically to feed those animals. So it is a dire situation for people. And I would suggest the people that are probably the most likely to liquidate their herds are going to be the older producers. If you're in your 50s or older than your 50s, if you've got to start cutting your herd down and then the rebuilding process, if you want to retain, is not immediate. You can't go out there and buy back or you can't build it back up your herd to what you thought or thought you should have with your genetics and that. So it's probably about a 5 to 10 year process to bring you back to where you were once you get you downsize quite significantly. So this is going to have an effect. We can see, and we're hearing about, the older producers in the cattle industry are saying, once I've liquidated down to a certain point where I've liquidated my herd, I'm probably not going to get back into the business again.
My goodness. Ugh. Now, Lynn, obviously, topic of conversation the past week or so has been the war in Ukraine. What are you hearing from the ag community with regard to the war in the Ukraine? They've been traditionally one of the biggest grain suppliers for Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. So will this create a new export market, and could it drive up prices here?
Well, I guess to break it down, we talked about the war and the effects it was going to have on agriculture at the CFA meeting among ourselves as delegates. And this is going to affect all of Canada. Basically, are all Canadian producers. What we're seeing, I guess, with the Ukraine and Russia with the war, how is that going to affect their production? And a lot of their large areas of Ukraine that actually are producing, or agriculture producers, are in the regions that are, under attack right now or very close to. But it's not only if those producers in Ukraine and can't get the inputs that they need with fuel and fertilizer and some of the weed sprays and their seed. So this could have a very dramatic effect on what they're going to produce this year, for sure. Russia, not so sure how that's going to work out. But you take Ukraine out of the equation, and they are the larger producer of that region. It's going to have a significant effect on world prices and world supply. And Ukraine supplied markets that we have supplied in the past, but they still filled in a large part of that demand. What it really means, if they're cut off, there's going to be more demand for products out of North America and other regions of production.
I was going to ask, so if the war continues and if we have another drought, How could this end up affecting Canadian consumers, like at the grocery store checkout? Do you think it's going to drive it up that way?
Uh, well, it already has. I think people are already complaining about grocery prices. And yes, it has the potential to drive it farther and prices increases even more. But there is some anomalies within that pricing system too within Canada of large profits for large corporations like Loblaws is something like up about 400% on their profitability this year. So I think there's going to be a hard look at basically at the profitability of some of the larger corporations for suppliers of groceries and that as we go through this year. Another thing that's really starting to look and happen is people are looking at local food production and what they can do in that area already. They're talking about it. And also food waste and maybe there's going to be more of a demand. People are looking at maybe not having that perfect vegetable sitting on their table. They may be looking at some blemishes on some of the product, but we have that food waste, which is what 8 or 10% of the food that comes into this country already. So I think that there's going to be a hard look at that and how that is going to be handled too.
Wow. Are ag producers responding to the increased costs with carbon taxes? And now, of course, gas is going through the roof as well as oil. How are ag producers responding to all of this?
Well, I guess the usual practice was last fall, and we always were buying our products, in the fall. Like, so we lay on our supplies of fertilizer and some of the weed sprays and chemicals that we need and the other input costs that we need in the fall. I think there was quite a few producers have walked in or maybe have taken delivery of at least their fertilizer for the spring coming up. But there will be a certain segment of the population that was thinking, okay, we'll maybe do it just before Christmas or the end of their cropping year, what they were looking at. And I know there was some people were thinking, well, the price is too high right now. There's a chance of it maybe going down, so they held off. So if you're in that situation, you are paying way more than you would have say, if you bought your supplies before the start of the year. But one of the things too that we're sort of hearing is some of the fertilizer companies are saying, well, you may have bought your product and that, but we're not guaranteeing you delivery of your product. So that's a big worry for some people.
Oh, big time. Absolutely. Lynn, it does look like we are about out of time, but I thank you so much for joining us today from Enchant in southern Alberta. You gave me a little geography lesson before on to where exactly Enchant is, so I appreciate that.
Okay, it was nice talking to you.
Thank you. Lynn Jacobson is the president of the Alberta Federation of Agriculture. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for watching.